The page will feature fewer titles and more videos. Company officials say the goal is a sleeker design. Get BIN News Now on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
The following is a paid program and does not necessarily express the views or opinions of Equity Media, its management, staff, or affiliates of WBOK.
Now, it's the Monitor's Mic with your host, Stella Cement.
Welcome to the Monitor's Mic, where we talk oversight, policing, and you. I'm Stella Cement, your host and the Independent Police Monitor for the City of New Orleans, and with me is Chriselle Williams, our Deputy Police Monitor. This show is your go-to source for discussing policing, law enforcement oversight, and how it all impacts you. From the Office of the Independent Police Monitor, we offer an independent perspective on city government. The Office of the Independent Police Monitor, OIPM, serves as a crucial civilian oversight body for the New Orleans Police Department, the NOPD. We ensure transparency and accountability within the police department by making sure the NOPD follows their policies, abides by the consent decree, and is compliant with all local, state, and federal laws. Our office operates independently from the NOPD and from the federal monitors. What do we do day to day? We take complaints of officer misconduct from the public and from fellow police officers. We review misconduct investigations conducted by the NOPD's Internal Affairs, which is called the Public Integrity Bureau. We're on call 24 hours a day, every day of the year for officer-involved shootings and critical incidents, and we will go to the scene and monitor the force investigation from start to finish. We are advisory members of the Use of Force Review Board and attend disciplinary hearings. We run the Community Police Mediation Program, and we engage the community to ensure your voice, opinions, and concerns are heard. We, your hosts, are not police officers, but we are experienced attorneys from the criminal legal field, dedicated to transparency and accountability. We encourage you to call in today with your questions, comments, and concerns. While we may not be able to address individual cases, we are committed to following up with you. With that, let's learn more about today's guest. Chriselle?
Well, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce one of my favorite people, Miss Emily Ma. Emily Ma has spent 26 years working for human rights in the criminal legal system in Louisiana. Since its creation in 2021, she was the chief of the first Civil Rights Division in the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office. The Civil Rights Division's goal is to acknowledge and address past harms caused by the criminal legal system and to increase transparency and confidence in law enforcement. Previously, she worked for Chief Justice Burnett Johnson on the Louisiana Supreme Court, and for over 16 years, she worked for Innocence Project New Orleans, serving as its director for 13 years. IPNO represents innocent prisoners serving life sentences in Louisiana and Mississippi. In that role, she worked with NOPD to create a pioneering series of classes for detectives and supervisors designed to prevent wrongful convictions and increase the resources devoted to the investigation of serious felony investigations, a training that hundreds of NOPD officers have now received. She also spent 4 years working on capital cases in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. She has served on the board of directors of the Innocence Network and the Louisiana Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, LACTO. She also served on the board of the Louisiana Justice Coalition, an organization dedicated to establishing a statewide public defender system in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, and was a founding board member of Resurrection After Exoneration, the first exoneree-led prisoner reentry program in the country. Emily has been a Peacher Foundation Fellow, a Phillips Brooks House Fellow at Harvard College, and was named Edinburgh University's Alumnus of the Year in 2007. She received her Bachelor of Laws from the University of Edinburgh and her Juris Doctor from Tulane Law School, where she has since been an adjunct faculty for several years. She has lived in New Orleans for 26 years, most recently with a husband, two ridiculous daughters, two ridiculous dogs, an ever-varying number of chickens, and the skeptical cat. And just to tell some y'all a little bit about one of her chickens. So one of her chickens used to be named after me as well. The chicken was named Kershell. Her daughter loved my name, so there you have it.
She thought it was the most beautiful name she had ever heard.
So how many people can say they had chickens named after them?
Thank you, Kershell. Hi.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us today. So let's start with giving, our listeners a little bit of the fundamentals and the background. So when we get back to, other things, they'll have an idea what this legal jargon and some of the explanations are for some legal terms. So you worked in a lot of legal spaces in New Orleans and Mississippi and Texas, to be fair, over the years. So let's explain to our listeners what exactly is post-conviction. What is post-conviction work?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Post-conviction work is actually exactly what it sounds like. It is work that happens on a criminal case after a conviction or after a conviction and sentence is final. The process by which somebody is convicted of a crime will start with an arrest or a charge. There will be a lot of pretrial proceedings and evidence being determined to be admissible or inadmissible at the trial. Somebody will either plead guilty or go to trial. And then they have the right to an appeal, which is whether there were any sort of legal issues at their trial that affected the fairness of that proceeding at the time. If that appeal is denied, then their conviction is considered final, and anything that happens after that is post-conviction. That is the procedural place that it happens. But what it is substantively is when there is information or evidence or something about the arrest and the prosecution of that person that wasn't known at the time the trial was happening. Post-conviction is the time that a person in prison, a person who's incarcerated, or in some instances now a prosecutor's office can bring that to the attention of the court, and the court can consider whether that was important enough, whether it's the kind of information that probably should have been known at the time or might have changed the outcome, that a court would be willing to change the result in some way.
Wait, hold on. Can we unpack that? Because you just said something that was really interesting. Well, all of it is very interesting. But this action, post-conviction actions, don't have to be necessarily initiated by the defense?
Well, no, they do. The code, for example, in Louisiana, the Louisiana code requires that a petitioner bring a post-conviction action, but the way in which information might be discovered or sort of brought to the attention of the court can also be through review or action by a prosecutor's office. There's no prohibition on that, and certainly, there are many places that consider that to be a best practice.
Interesting. So the prosecution's office can review their own cases and effectively question their own convictions.
Yes, that is. I mean, it's not just possible; it's desirable. I don't think there's any entity that should exist that isn't capable of reviewing its own work and or reviewing an outcome that it participated in, and reassessing it in light of new evidence if there is some.
Is this type of post-conviction work the same thing as wrongful conviction?
That's a good question. So wrongful conviction it's not really a term of art. It's just an adjective. Well, wrongful conviction is just an adjective and a noun. But I think people assume a wrongful conviction is like the conviction of an innocent person.
Right.
That when many people use the term wrongful conviction, they mean that. But there are a lot of people, myself included, and I think the legal system generally accepts that wrongful convictions can be really, there's sort of three places where, or three kinds of wrongful conviction. One is that you can be convicted of a crime that you didn't commit. The other is you can be convicted of a lot more than what you actually did. You were also wrongly convicted. It's not accurate. And then the third is you can be convicted of something by a very wrong process. And that is the place where people start to struggle. Or does that really matter? And I'm often guilty of using analogies with my children, and I don't ever want to be sort of flippant or glib by doing so. But I was thinking about this some recently, like how to really describe why a wrongful conviction, which is potentially getting somebody convicted for something that they did through a very wrong process, matters so much. You can be wrongly convicted and still have done a wrong, right? It's not a zero-sum game. It's not like only one side can have committed a wrong in a prosecution. So I have two girls, and we're currently going through the phase in our house where everyone's very into how they look. It's a bit of a new phase for me, and I don't really know how to handle it. But everyone's quite concerned with their outfits all of a sudden. And so, the other day, anybody who is a sibling or has more than one child will know this noise, and it goes something like, "Mum, she hit me," right? And okay, and the big one has hit the little one, and I say, "Well, what was that about?" She says, "Well, I can't find my shirt. She stole it." I'm like, "Are you sure?" It's my favorite shirt. She's always stealing it. I'm like, okay, well, and then I asked the little one, "Did you steal it?" "No, I didn't steal it." Well, it turns out she borrowed the shirt without asking, right? And the reaction of the older one when she found out her favorite shirt wasn't there was to assume that it was her sister and hit her. So we have a borrowed shirt without asking, which is a wrong, right? You don't borrow somebody else's shirt without asking. But you also don't assume and then hit someone in response immediately, right? So there is some wrong there. But if you as a parent are going to say, it's okay, because the end of punishing the person who stole your shirt justifies the way you did it, you're very quickly going to have a very chaotic household and not much respect from the little one who steals the shirts all the time, right? It does matter how you respond to a wrong. And it does matter as to take it back to criminal justice, it does matter the process that the court say is acceptable in response to a wrong. It's not a zero-sum game. There can be two wrongs, right? You can have somebody who's done something wrong, and the government response, whether it's the police, whether it's the courts, whatever, can also be wrong and needs to be corrected.
And that's very interesting how you talk about that, and especially that analogy, because that is an area that people struggle with wrongful convictions. They're usually okay with being behind those that are wrongfully convicted that have some innocence claim to it. Someone that didn't do it that they were told that they were accused of doing, but it gets a real murky for people when it starts like, well, maybe they did do this, but the process that they did to get this conviction was inadequate. And they don't understand how, well, does it matter? And then you have those other people on the other side of that, as that always are like, well, they maybe didn't do this, but they did something, so it's fine, whatever happens. But we have to remember that there are processes in the criminal legal system that are built to protect people that are guilty of a crime, as well as those that are innocent for the crime.
And really all the gray area in between, right? Because in the giant Venn diagram of problems, there is an awful lot of overlap between being very sort of disregarding people's rights and process, people getting convicted of far more than they should have been convicted of, and people getting convicted of things that they never had anything to do with. And I think a little bit when I think of wrongful convictions that are both to do with process and to do with conviction beyond that was deserved, I think of like the Gina 6 kids, right, who were charged, 6 black kids in Gina, Louisiana, in like 2006-7, who were charged with some of them were charged with attempted second-degree murder for having a schoolyard fight with a white kid who got slightly injured in the fight. That case could very easily have continued on being over prosecuted, and those kids could have been convicted of various things like aggravated battery and attempted second degree murder that they were initially charged with.
Right.
The 6 kids were not in the end, because a large intervention happened and they were all represented well. The charges were brought down to arguably appropriate misdemeanor level charges, and they all went on with their lives, many of them very successfully. It would have been a wrongful conviction if those prosecutions had continued in the way they did, and it would have been wrong because it was over prosecution, and they would have been over convicted, grossly over convicted for a schoolyard fight. But it also would have been wrong because it was racist, right?
Right, absolutely. So, with this type of post-conviction work and wrongful conviction work, is it your understanding that this is a civil right? I guess, what I'm trying to ask is it a civil right to have a fair process, a fair trial? Is that your civil right?
So civil rights are generally considered to be rights that you hold against the government, right? So vis-a-vis the government. Yeah, you don't have a civil right against your neighbor to not be a very annoying neighbor, even if he's like racist and sexist and whatever, right? That's not your civil right. That's just you need to move, or he needs to move. But your civil rights exist against the government and against government intrusion on your life. The Bill of Rights lays it out, and then the Universal Declaration of Human Rights lays this kind of thing out too. There are these fundamental rights that people have, and one of them is that the government can't march into your home and search it and take your children away, right, without some reason for doing that. Another one is the government can't kill you without giving you a process and some sort of reason that they're doing that. Nor can they put you in prison without telling you why they're doing it, telling you what you're charged with, giving you a trial, and giving you a trial where you have a chance to defend yourself. So, I'm breaking it down to very basic, but from those fundamental rights against the government come the various rights that we give people in criminal cases.
So now that we understand some of these fundamentals and these different legal terms, can you talk to us about your time at the district attorney's office? Recently, you worked under Jason Williams at the DA's office. What did you do there?
Excuse me. So I was the chief of the First Civil Rights Division, which I think was mentioned earlier, and that was set up in 2021 when DA Williams took office. The idea of the division was to acknowledge and address past harms caused by the criminal legal system, and to increase accountability, transparency, and therefore confidence in law enforcement. I want to be very clear when we talk about past harms, because we have always said harms in this context, because it is harms as experienced, not as intended, right? And I think when you say the criminal legal system has caused harm, that might bring to mind for many people an idea of a lot of judges and lawyers and police officers walking around trying to harm people. And that is the exact opposite of the majority of people who work in the criminal legal system. The majority of people who work in the vast majority of the people who work in any capacity are there because they are trying to serve their community and help people in trouble in different ways. So it is not that we have a system that has been populated by people intending to do harm, any more than we have an aviation industry that has been flying people around the country intending to cause climate change, right? It is a byproduct of a lot of ways that we have done things that are unintended consequences, but nevertheless, those consequences are very real, and we have to address how they have been felt. And obviously, one of the things that I say obviously, I know some people wouldn't agree with this, but I think the data is overwhelming, that the criminal legal system in New Orleans, in places that have high or high numbers of people living in poverty, and obviously we have a majority black city here. The way the criminal legal system has been felt in communities of color and in poor communities is very, very different to the way that it is felt, its presence is felt in more affluent communities and minority communities. And when I say minority, I mean white in New Orleans. And so it is the reason to do it, the reason to say we in the district attorney's office believe that the criminal legal system should acknowledge and address, can't just pay lip service to it, you have to address it too, the different ways that people have felt harmed by the criminal legal system, is because otherwise people don't trust the criminal legal system and people don't participate in the criminal legal system. And that creates a far, far more violent and more unpredictable society than one in which people believe that even with some flaws, it is a system that is trying to help, that is trying to make things fair, and is trying to create a better and more peaceful society for people, or at least contribute to having a better, more peaceful, more predictable society.
You said a lot of things that I just want to repeat because I thought they were so powerful. This idea of it's about past harms as experienced
I like that.
and not as intended. That is a very important thought to carry into this work and also to carry into any type of bureaucratic structure or criminal legal space, truthfully every space, where we are potentially touching on the lives of others. And then the idea that if we don't actively look at these things, then people won't trust or participate in the process. And that will be detrimental to our society and our safety. Wow, that is a lot. I have to say, you're really forcing our brains to move away from the polarization of how we normally look at the criminal legal system. And I don't know about Chriselle, but I know that whenever I talk to people in the community, there's this black and white mentality of you are guilty or you are innocent. You have, done something wrong or you've done something right. And what you're basically telling us is that we have to let go of some of that binary stuff and see the gray. So if I ask for a glass of cold water and I receive the opposite of cold water, it is not necessarily hot water.
Right.
It could be anything that is not cold water. It could be slightly cold. It could be slightly warm. It could be room temperature. It could be boiling hot. It could be scalding, or it could just be a little hot. There's a lot of gradation there, and we want to be able to see that in our legal system. So when we're talking about under the umbrella of wrongful conviction, there's a lot of gradation there. We're not saying that the opposite of wrongful conviction is innocent. We're saying it could be a myriad of things, and we have to look at all of these things. And if we don't look at them, people won't trust this system and they won't participate in it. Wow. So thank you. That has really kind of blown me away.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. What type, now we know that we've gotten an idea, of the types of ways that you're serving the community by doing this work. But what does this actually logistically look like? What type of cases is this going to be that you're handling?
So the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office Civil Rights Division was set up to acknowledge that Orleans Parish has the highest per capita incarceration rate in the world, highest per capita rate of people serving life without the possibility of parole in the world. By many tallies, the highest proven wrongful conviction rate in the United States, which probably means in the world, although the US is sort of unique, I think, in the way that it tracks this stuff. So I don't want to overstate that. Orleans Parish had in in January of 2021, there were 730 prisoners just from Orleans Parish in the Department of Corrections system who were serving time based on a multiple bill, like an enhanced sentence. And Orleans Parish imposed the multiple bill at a rate that was hundreds of times higher than any other parish in the state, including places like East Baton Rouge and Shreveport, with similar demographics for their size, right? And also, struggling with crime. 730 something people was the entire population from San Francisco County that was in the California Department of Corrections at that time. So just the people multiple billed out of Orleans Parish was the entire population of people who've been sent to prison from San Francisco. Our response to crime has been so extreme and so bloated that there has been not only people experiencing it as very unfair, people, we saw when we came into the office that there were people serving life without parole for purse snatching because they had been multiple billed with other prior non-violent offenses. And so they had a life sentence for purse snatching. We saw cases like that. And we just saw we knew of many cases where the process given to somebody was so brief because there was so much being sent through the criminal justice system for so long to get to those numbers, right? Those prison numbers that Orleans has, which are so massive, that even very serious cases didn't have the time or the resources given to them that they probably warranted. I don't mean every case, right? You can always find an exception. Right. I mean trends. I mean what you can see over and over again, that sort of the average. And so we broke that down into what are the categories of cases then that we should pay attention to. And so obviously wrongful conviction cases, meaning cases that are either people who are innocent of the crime and anything else, people who are really inaccurately over-convicted, people who were convicted by a process that was either overtly, by a law or a procedure that was either overtly racist or had very, very disproportionate impact. I will say that the main example of that is the non-unanimous jury rule. Okay. So non-unanimous jury convictions in Orleans Parish. And then people whose wrongful conviction was a product of, what we call state misconduct very broadly. Again, not necessarily any actor intending to commit a harm against somebody, but where the process against that person was unfair. And there are sort of legal definitions of that. I don't necessarily need to go into exactly what the standard is for each of those, but where there is a very unfair process used to prosecute and convict somebody or arrest them in the first place. And the state has a responsibility to correct those cases. And correction doesn't necessarily mean that person just walks out of prison, right? Correction can mean many things, but we have to address it if we want to tell people we're going to be fair going forward. So wrongful conviction cases. Then we also determined that we would look at extreme sentences. And I say that because, extreme sentences can be legal, but there is a point at which the extremity of that sentence it is no longer serving any purpose and is in fact detrimental, not just to that person and the community. Often, I don't want to generalize too much, but often, if it's a violent crime, to people who survive that crime, or to the victim themselves. And I don't want to, I don't pretend to speak for anybody who's experienced somebody being sentenced to a very long period of time as a result of an interaction that is termed violent but might be relatively minor in the scheme of things. People have been horrified to learn the sentence that somebody got as a result of that. So it's not serving anybody. Right. It's also extremely expensive. Yes. The amount of money, right, that this state, just from incarcerating people out of Orleans Parish, has put into that. If we could just take a third of that money and put it into schools, put it into early childhood education, put it into like the best budget for NORD that anyone has ever seen, we would have a very different city, right? So when I say there are harms to reduce, right? Extreme sentencing has many, many bad outcomes, and that was one bucket of cases that we said we would look at.
So, two things. First, when you said correction does not necessarily mean you're walking out of jail. Again, that fits into what we were just talking about, unmarrying our brain from the idea of a correction automatically meaning you're going free, get out of jail now. It's like you were never punished at all. And the other thing is that you're introducing us to the idea that there are people that are serving prison sentences, incarceration sentences for life for nonviolent offenses due to the Multiple Bill Act. And I will say, as a former public defender, I had a client sentenced to life after he was convicted by a jury of stealing $15 out of a bait car that was set up in Central City. And it was part of a bait car operation. And he reached into an open window and took $15 out of the center console. And he got life after being found guilty. So this is, I only use that as an example because you said purse snatching, that there's a lot of people that might be serving a lot of time around offenses that I don't think the average person would have associated that amount of time with that sentence.
And that's certainly true for addicts, right? But people who, because they get repeated.
Yeah, especially heroin possession.
Exactly, and or low-level theft charges, and those add up to sometimes a life sentence. And that is, as far as I am aware, a life sentence is a pretty ineffective way of treating an addiction.
I would agree. Now, how do you find these cases, though? Because what you're describing could potentially be thousands of cases. How are you deciding which cases are worthy of this level of review?
So I think it's important to remember that a prosecutor's office, district attorney's office, is not, it's not an office of crusading, right? It is, we are the government and we are largely responsive. So when the Civil Rights Division was established, it was not long after the Ramos case came out of the US Supreme Court. And there were organizations collecting all of the non-unanimous jury verdict convictions from around the state and filing applications for post-conviction relief for those people. So we were not, we didn't go out and say, it's our job to find those cases. We were responsive to non-unanimous jury verdict cases when they came in. Most of those cases overlapped with other issues, by the way. Often, so we would respond to a post-conviction application, and we did that with many non-unanimous jury cases. In alleged wrongful conviction cases, it's the same thing. Somebody would bring a case to us, and that could be a defense lawyer. We have had a very good relationship with the appeals division, so we would discuss between our division and the appeals division whether a case presented an issue that overlapped with the Civil Rights Division's priorities, and then we would determine who was going to handle it and how it was going to be handled. People might apply to us to look at their case because they said they were innocent. Right. Often Innocence Project New Orleans, my former colleagues there would bring us a case and say, could you look at this one, please? Or other lawyers would. Judges would refer cases to us if they thought it overlapped with some of the issues we had stated were going to be our priorities. On the extreme sentencing cases, those present themselves on the face of it. And so you can see that just from data that you have from the Department of Corrections and then the underlying file. Very often with those cases, we would say this looks like a case that has a sentence that's out of whack, and a lawyer would look further into it and do a bit of digging on what the underlying convictions were, do a little bit of an understanding about how the person ended up in that situation in the first place, and bring it back to us and say, here's a case for reducing this sentence, and if it was if it was legal for us to do so, if we had the power to do so, in the discretion that is traditionally been vested to the district attorneys, we would, in appropriate circumstances, make that adjustment.
So, I'm sorry, just really quickly, if there's someone in the community right now that wanted help from Criminal Rights Division, I heard you say that that they can actually apply for that help. How do they do that?
Well, if you want a conviction review, meaning you want your case to be reinvestigated as a potential innocence case, then there is a way to communicate with the Civil Rights Division just by writing to the District Attorney's Office, and they will flag that case, and there are people who can look into it. But to be very clear, those cases are, the district attorney can't represent somebody. It can't be sort of responsive to somebody's family calling all the time and saying, I need you to look at this case. We try to be responsive to those requests, but the district attorney's office does not represent anybody and doesn't have any particular individual outcome that it is advocating for or trying to, it's not trying to do anything beyond be a responsible government agency. And therefore, if somebody really wants to be advocated for, they should go to one of the nonprofit organizations or defense lawyers that can do that investigation, that can look into their case, and then they can bring it to the DA's office, and the DA's office then can do a better job of responding appropriately. For a while, I used to say that we were like the DMV of justice. We just sort of processed applications determined that were brought to us by other people to determine whether there was anything to them or not. It wasn't some long crusade.
So I've heard a lot, Emily, about how the system is kind of being relooked at, the way that you've traveled through the system, but I'm not hearing a lot about policing. I'm not hearing a lot about the issues of police corruption that so many people in our community believe have fed to wrongful convictions or innocent people ending up in jail. The idea of, we got a comment I'm seeing on our Facebook account. What can the DA's office do when the police cover up a crime or when the police, plant evidence?
So I am remiss for skipping over this, but one of the factors that is true about historically, the Orleans Parish criminal justice system historically, is that we have an inordinate number of police officers who've been convicted of violent crimes and are in prison, right? Mm-hmm. And Melvin Williams, Flat Top, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously Len Davis, the notorious one, Sammy Williams, his partner. We have people who are convicted of crimes relating to their performance, not of something unrelated, not of, like domestic violence when they get home, but that relate directly to their performance and their interaction with the public that was so bad it rose to the level of a murder conviction.
Right.
And the problem of that officer, in any of those cases, I just named 3 notorious ones, but there are more, is not solved when a conviction of that officer happens. Because that officer, generally, these people have been, patrol officers, right? So a lot of low-level public interactions. They're not detectives. They're not people who you can go back and say they worked on these 12 homicides, but they are day-to-day point of contact interactions with the public, and low-level like drug arrests, weapons arrests. It is very, very hard to know how to. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me back up. Nothing has ever been done to audit the cases of those people, to audit how many individuals did Melvin Williams come into contact with. And I believe that one of the places that the criminal justice system has squandered trust is by not doing that when somebody was discovered to have been or exposed as being not just, somebody who cuts corners, but somebody that murders innocent civilians, right?
Yes.
When the police department or the various oversight bodies, there was no independent police monitor at the time those things happened, do not go back and say, we need to see all the people that this person affected. And the answer may be 2, right? Yes. It may be 1. It doesn't matter. The point is there has to be an effort, and people need to see that there is an effort to determine the extent of the other damage that person has done. Yes. And you're not going to instill any confidence from any member of the public who's seen them doing something, or it's like watch their cousin be taken away by that guy, that you take seriously people's rights if you don't go back and review. So just to say, I just wanted to say that before I back up and say, one of the things we were also trying to do was target cases that had been affected by officers who had not a disciplinary infraction. We all get disciplinary infractions at work, right? That's a thing. But people who had been convicted of grossly disqualifying crimes like murder, right? Why hasn't anybody done an audit? Okay, Civil Rights Division needs to try to look back and see how many cases these officers touched, and how many civilians were affected by their conduct.
So let's play critic for a moment. There are people in this field who believe that the police is an arm of the district attorney's office. So are you betraying the position of being an assistant district attorney and working within the district attorney's office if you are challenging the police, if you're doing these types of audits and now looking under the hood of the car and saying, I don't know if I believe you anymore?
So, the police are not a branch of the district attorney's office. That's just basic civics. And I think, so much of what police do is nothing to do with investigating and prosecuting crime, right? Like, police have a big role in the community.
Whoa, what do you mean by that? Let's unpack that.
Okay, so my first memory of NOPD, and I came here in 1998, and it was like in September, and there was that like Southern Decadence Festival, which is a very bold situation.
Bold is a word, yes.
And I was like just arrived in New Orleans, fresh off the boat from England, and I was walking through the French Quarter, and I'm sure everybody's seen this, but during many of the festivals we have celebrating the diversity of sexualities that people express, there are protesters. There are like religious protesters, right? And I was walking through this thing, looking around, and there was a lot of men who weren't wearing really anything, and a lot of people with signs suggesting they were going to hell. And what was keeping that a beautiful celebration for some people and an absolute right to First Amendment expression for the others was the NAPD, right? They were there making sure that these people's First Amendment rights were respected, and that these people were not threatened, and that nothing turned into a negative situation in the French Quarter for both of these groups. That was not investigating or prosecuting crime, right? So just to be clear, that's not a branch of the DA's office. That is the police out there in the community doing exactly what we want them to do, protecting and serving and doing all the community work that matters. So just to dispel this, like, all they do is work for the DA. Even if they did, right? The other thing that's going on in my life at the moment, in addition to everybody in the house really caring how they look, is a lot of youth sports. So I have a lot of sports in my brain, right? There isn't a coach who you would say, if someone's on the field and they're doing a lot of fouls, getting a lot of penalties, right? Keep them in, right? No. What you want the coach to do, even if they're your best, whether it's your best striker, if it's in soccer, or your best running back in what you all call football, you don't want the coach to keep that person on the field. You want the coach to say, you need to come and sit down for a minute, right? Because you're not going to win the game if they keep fouling.
Right. But what about people who genuinely believe that is the job? So there are people that genuinely believe, let the police be the police. Mm-hmm. Let the aggressive players get you to a victory. Mm-hmm. Why is it detrimental? Why, in the perspective of a prosecutor, is it detrimental to let aggressive people that are willing to cut the corners to get the job done stay? Why is that a problem for you?
To be clear, there is a constitution.
Talk to us about that.
That very explicitly said that this country doesn't want to be a country where the ends justify the means, right? And of course, if people would like to live in a place that doesn't have a constitution, there's a process for that. It's quite complicated, as I hear, but if you're going to have the benefits of the kinds of protections that the Constitution of the United States offers, that for a long time has been the envy of the world, right? You have to be prepared to have it applied in the tricky cases, right? It has to be. Otherwise, you may as well rip it up and throw it out.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you're not going to have your freedom of expression any more than that person's going to have their gun, any more than that person's going to have due process, even if he did rob you, right?
Right.
So I just want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about something. This is going to be a little bit of a pivot, but it's still talking about police work and checking police work. And it truthfully, it's something that I think we need to acknowledge on this show, because if any of our listeners are listening and they're saying, who is this Emily Ma, this smart, wonderful Emily Ma? But then they Google your name.
Oh yeah, that will be.
Yes. What may come up is a series of articles and pieces that came out during Mardi Gras a couple years ago. And you came under some heat for dismissing charges that had to do with gun offenses in the French Quarter. And our understanding of those dismissals were that they were due to some of the language in the police reports, specifically that officers might have been using vague language that looked like cut and paste and failed to establish probable cause to approach those individuals. And as a result, you dismissed some gun charges. You dismissed a handful of gun charges, and you got a lot of attention for that.
Yes, I did.
What was that like for you?
Well, I think the first thing to say on those gun charges is that almost all of them were legal guns being carried by people without criminal records.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been completely legal if they had been, as one of my favorite judges said, stuck to their forehead or worn in a chain around their neck, right? But because they were in their pocket, it was not legal.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing to say is that there was pretty vague language in a lot of those reports, which I completely understand, exigencies of the moment. But given the nature of the crimes charged, 95-1, which is not felon in possession, these are not stolen weapons. The paperwork that was going to come in on those cases was exactly what somebody at what's called first appearances was seeing. There wasn't going to be any additional supplemental reporting on a case like that. It's just getting people off the streets at Mardi Gras. And then the other thing to say is that everyone was black.
And by everyone, you mean everyone that was arrested?
Everyone who'd been arrested that day for those charges, yes.
Okay.
And it is possible, of course, that only the black people who came to New Orleans for Mardi Gras, a lot of them were from out of town, by the way, didn't get the memo about you have to wear your gun around your neck or on your belt, and that all white people did understand that. But there is a situation that you see in front of you where it's only black people getting charged for this. So it's not a violent offense. It's effectively a status offense. And you think, well, that's just a pattern there that's not great. Right? Now, that aside, I believe in people being arrested and have their guns taken away if they take them to the French Quarter, right? And that is what happened. And so I, having been in the DA's office for quite a while at that point, having manned a section of court, having done a lot of screening, having the criminal justice system overwhelmed by very sort of serious crime that people, the police department, the DA's office, between them and other organizations were beginning to identify and target as like, who are the 20, 30 people in the city who are causing the majority of problems right now. It was that was not those people who'd come to Mardi Gras, right? Mm-hmm. And we didn't at that time have enough people in magistrate court. These cases were going to go into the system and take up space on dockets, take up prosecutors' time, and probably all of them were either going to be refused after 60 days or dismissed after the searches were found to be unconstitutional. And in both of those instances, the person, the court time, DA time, public defender time taken up, the bondsman gets paid when they get out, but other than that, time gets taken up. And after all that, the gun goes back to the person who was picked up, right? The solution that in the moment when I'm seeing all this stuff, I'm like, why don't we just take these guns away and not crowd our dockets with people who don't have a criminal record, including some pretty, successful sports people, I think, and that I had no idea of that. And when we are talking about having no resources in the criminal legal system for the violent crime that we are trying to pursue, because there was a very serious crime spike, just the tail end of COVID and after COVID, as we all know, a sensible solution here is to do this. I understand that caused uproar, but I believe was more responsible than letting those cases sail through the system, sit there, take up time, take up money, and ultimately everybody gets their gun back.
Right.
So that's what I did. Yes, indeed, it caused an uproar. And it is one of the things that has made me reflect on the way we make criminal justice policy and the amount of sort of politics and media that goes into decisions that are nuanced and based on experience by whether it's professionals or people who are like expert advisors to the system. There, it can crowd out thoughtful, data-based, experience-based decision making because of the way the media decides a story is a story, right? And we can paint it this way, and it's going to be it's going to get clicks, it's going to get people excited about it, and it is, I think, really detrimental to making real progress in how we change what people have experienced at the hands of the legal system.
It sounds like this experience, excuse me, this experience that you had has, it's pretty much outlining, kind of demonstrating the endless clash that we have between constitutional rights and constitutional policing. And it kind of brings us back to what we were talking about earlier, how, people, you brought up the media and how they see things and what's going to be a story. So when people read this in context, they only immediately go to the illegality of the guns or how they may have been illegal in the French Quarter. But again, you point out the fact that, they would not have been illegal if they were on their forehead or being worn on a chain. But the way that they had them carried and, made them illegal. And then people see that a lot of times. And Emily, of course, they're like, I don't care how the police arrest them, if it's constitutional now, what processes they use, as long as they're arresting them and these guns are now off the street. So, and these people are not able to commit these crimes with these guns anymore. So as a lawyer hearing that,
I do just want to push back on that because there was no evidence any of those people are committed.
Absolutely.
But because I do think it's easy to conflate these things, be like illegal guns. Like, well, they're illegal guns just in an illegal place.
And absolutely, that's the point, because a lot of people read things about or hear about what happened and they automatically assume crimes, illegal, these people need to be off the street, what is going on in the French Quarter, right? So what would you say to those individuals that have automatically that thought process and those feelings?
Well, I'm going to say something that is very unpopular amongst many of my friends. I think there is so much that can be policing that can be done that doesn't have to result in a conviction. Like when I think about all the ways that the police intersected with my life as a kid, right, in Britain, with their truncheons. Sorry, they really carry truncheons. And all the times, right, that interventions happened that did not result in any conviction for anyone. I fully believe that one of the mistakes we make is thinking that the police is an emergency service, right? And sometimes the response to an emergency is that something needs to be prosecuted. But very often the response to an emergency, if you have a police force that people have faith in, and is that police can break up a situation. They can take somebody to jail for a night. They can take somebody to the drunk tank for the night. You go to jail for the night and you give up your gun, and you probably won't do that again, right? You and your girlfriend are having a blazing row. No one has hit anybody, but it could get that way. No, everybody could be separated. Police can come to a situation, calm down a situation, deal with the situation. I'm just pulling examples out. I think situations I've seen or been in or whatever. And that can be a great public service that doesn't have to end in a conviction. And I think when we are fixated on, no, it has to be processed through and somebody has to have a conviction on their record for this, is where we really fail the public, and where sort of protecting and serving starts to feel more like processing.
Wow. And, by framing it that way, I think some of the backlash that we saw in the aftermath of those cases being dismissed was this idea that the police work was then devalued. What these officers had done was that you were effectively saying, I disagree with your police action. I disagree with your decision making to approach. I disagree with you arresting, But that wasn't necessarily what was being said at all.
To be clear, later on, that is probably what was going to be found by courts.
Yes, yes. But
There is an absolute value in removing people from a crowded space if they have a gun, right?
Yes.
And you know, collecting a bunch of guns that day. I'm not ashamed of that at all.
yeah, it kind of goes back to your metaphor of how the player is playing the game and that the coach sometimes does bench a player or take the player out of the game. And it's, you know, how an arrest is happening matters, even if it was going to get to a point that may have been questioned in the end, you know? Wow, that is it's helpful to hear about all of this. I have to say, how are you personally through that process? Because you are a leader in this field. You took a beating in this. You did.
I did.
You took a beating. How did you come back from that?
It took a minute, and I think because some of the sort of personal vitriol that was directed at me as a result of this was really out of whack. I mean, it's not anything I would have expected from, you know, making a series of decisions that were, I thought, sensible.
Yeah.
And it is easy to understand, well, this is the media doing what they do, and this is these talking heads who like to gin people up doing what they do, and everybody, you know, is this is just how politics is played. It is hard to have people sort of find out how to contact you and express things that are pretty violent towards your family, for example, which seemed like a really disproportionate response. And so I personally, it did take a while to bear the vitriol. But I tell you what was interesting. It really confirmed I think what I had said earlier, which is that many people working in the criminal justice system understand that there are things we could do, you know, differently, if we could listen to or apply best practices, if we could be really thoughtful about what we look at in data, not just be tracking some kind of data, but let's track other kinds of data too. And I know that, you know, there are certain organizations that are, you know, ostensibly watchdog organizations that track certain kinds of data, but that data is very skewed towards a certain set of things that, you know, data is sort of what you consider morally important, right? In any situation, there's certain data that's not being tracked in those things. So that's fine. But you can make decisions and you can change things if people are given the space to do that. And what makes me confident that there is a way to do that is the number of people, very surprising people who reached out to me during that time, very like conservative career prosecutors saying, don't you worry, like, of course all those gun charges were never going to go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
This is all nonsense. And the people across the board, whether it is law enforcement or whether it's prosecutors, people in the system who know that this is just these people making money off a sensation. So it did give me confidence and a real sense of, I think, sort of camaraderie with people who, perhaps unlikely people who were very decent in that situation. But it did make me understand that until we take criminal justice decision-making and policy formulation, remove it a little more from the kind of, you know, clickbait headlines, we are never going to make real progress. And I think I'm sort of living testament to that.
And I would add, until you remove policing decisions too,
Yes.
from a lot of that clickbait process, because it is. Oh, and I'm seeing we're at time.
We definitely
but,
are, but this has been a great
Yeah.
conversation to finish what you're saying.
But I think this experience, I really admired your bravery through it, and I'm just
Thank
really
you.
happy that we got to talk about it, because I really think it's important that people and stakeholders in this field understand that this is not easy work,
Absolutely.
and you did the uneasy stuff, and it was powerful.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of the Monitors
Oh my
Mic.
gosh,
I want
yeah.
to extend a heartfelt thank you to all our listeners for tuning in and staying engaged with the crucial conversation we're having about police oversight and community safety. I want to thank so much my former boss and friend Emily Mall. Emily Boss. What is that?
Thank you so
You could just call me Emily Bowles. That's
I
fine.
know. Thank you so much, Emily, for coming on today and joining us and having this conversation with us. I really do feel it's much needed, and I hope it's received everywhere. I love you. You know that.
Thank you. I love you
But we
too.
thank you for your work in the criminal legal system over all those years. So if you missed any part of today's episode, please catch up with us by visiting our website at www.nolaipm.gov, or you can find us and follow us on YouTube at NOLA IPM, and you can follow us on social media for more news and updates. On Instagram, we're NOLA OIPM, and on Facebook, New Orleans Independent Police Monitor. And until next time, stay informed, stay involved, and stay committed to building a safer community. This has been the Monitor's Mic.